There is a specific cruelty in being betrayed by someone who knows exactly what something means to you. A stranger can hurt you, but a stranger does it without precision. They don't know where to aim. They don't know which thing out of everything you have is the one you've wanted most and worked for longest and protected most carefully because you were afraid to want it too openly in case wanting it too much somehow jinxed the possibility of ever having it. A best friend of 22 years knows exactly where to aim, whether or not she intends to. My name is Priya. I'm 37 years old. I'm a graphic designer and art director based in Chicago, Illinois. And the person this story is about is a woman I'll call Becca, who was my best friend from the age of 15 until approximately 11 months ago when I received a phone call that dismantled 22 years in about 4 minutes. Let me tell you about Becca first, because she deserves to be a full person in this story rather than just a function of what she did. We met in 10th grade in the suburbs of Chicago, assigned to adjacent desks in an AP English class by a teacher who organized seating alphabetically and inadvertently created a friendship that would last more than 2 decades. Becca was funny in the particular way that makes you feel included in the joke rather than subject to it. She was generous with her time and her attention. She remembered things about people. She was the person you called when something went wrong, not because she always had the right answer, but because she had the right quality of listening, the kind that made you feel genuinely heard rather than waited out. She was also, I want to be honest about this, someone who had spent most of her adult life in a state of low-level professional dissatisfaction. Becca had a communications degree and had moved between jobs with a regularity that she described as staying fluid, and that I privately thought reflected a difficulty committing to a direction. She had done PR, then social media management, then content writing, then brand consulting, in a progression that made lateral sense but didn't build toward anything coherent. She was good at all of it. She never excelled. She told me once, during one of our late-night phone calls, that she felt like she was perpetually auditioning for a version of her career that hadn't shown up yet. I understood that feeling in a specific way because I had my own version of it, which was this. I had been a working graphic designer for 12 years, had built a solid career doing good work for decent clients, and had spent the last 4 of those years quietly, persistently, trying to get hired at a company called Meridian Creative. I need to tell you about Meridian so you understand what it represented. Meridian was not the biggest agency in Chicago, but it was the one I respected most. Mid-sized, fiercely independent, with a creative philosophy that aligned with mine in ways I had rarely found in the corporate-leaning agencies that made up most of the industry. They did brand identity work that I considered genuinely excellent, not trendy, not chasing whatever aesthetic was cycling through design blogs that month, but considered and original and built to last. Their creative director, a woman named Astrid, had done a talk at a conference I attended 3 years ago that I still thought about regularly. The kind of talk where you sit in the audience and feel your own ideas clarified and expanded simultaneously. I had applied to Meridian twice. The first time, 4 years ago, I had made it to a second-round interview and then been passed over for someone with more brand strategy experience, which was a gap I spent the following year deliberately addressing by taking on projects that built exactly that skill. The second time, 2 years ago, I had made it to a final round interview, met with Astrid directly, felt during that meeting something I can only describe as recognition, the specific feeling of being in a room with people who think the way you think, and then received a very kind rejection email saying that the role had been filled internally. I was devastated both times. I processed both times. I rebuilt both times. And I kept watching Meridian, kept tracking their open roles, kept updating my portfolio specifically with work I thought would resonate with their sensibility because I had decided that Meridian was worth being patient about. Becca knew all of this. She had been present for both rejections in real time, the phone calls, the processing, the rebuilding. She talked me through the self-doubt that follows a near miss in the specific way she was good at, with honesty and warmth, and none of the hollow reassurance that well-meaning people sometimes offer when they don't know what else to say. She knew what Meridian meant to me the way you know what someone's most important thing is when you've watched them tend it for years. 8 months ago, Meridian posted a senior art director role. It was, without exaggeration, the exact role I had been building toward. The scope, the level, the creative mandate. It was written as if someone had looked at my trajectory of my career and described the logical next step. I sent Becca a screenshot of the posting within minutes of finding it, with approximately 11 exclamation points, which is not typically my communication style, which tells you something about my level of excitement. She responded with enthusiasm, exclamation points of her own. She told me I was perfect for it. She asked about the timeline, what I needed to put together, whether my portfolio was current. We talked about it for an hour that evening on the phone. She was the first person I told, ahead of my partner, ahead of my mother, because she was the person I called first about things that mattered. I spent 3 weeks preparing my application. I revised my portfolio extensively, curating specifically for Meridian's aesthetic, and adding a case study document I was genuinely proud of, a deep dive analysis of 3 brand projects I had led, with process documentation and outcome metrics that I had spent hours building into something coherent and compelling. I wrote a cover letter that went through 7 drafts. I had a colleague review my portfolio. I had my partner review my cover letter. I did everything I knew how to do to give this application the best possible chance. I submitted it on a Thursday evening and then closed my laptop and told myself to let it go and not obsess, which I managed for approximately 48 hours. 4 weeks passed. I did not hear from Meridian. This was not unusual. Their process, based on my previous experiences with them, was slow and deliberate. I waited. On a Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was Becca. I picked up immediately, the way you pick up for someone's calls you've answered without hesitation for 22 years. She was excited. I could hear it in her voice before she said anything substantive, a particular energy she had when she was delivering news she was happy about. And she said, "I have to tell you something and I want you to be happy for me." I said, "Tell me." She said she had applied for a job, a creative role she had seen posted. She had been feeling ready for a change, feeling like her career needed a real direction, and she had seen this posting and it had felt right in a way things rarely did. So she had put together an application and gone through the process, and she had gotten it. She had gotten the job. I said, "That's amazing. What company?" She said, "Meridian Creative." There was a silence on my end that I genuinely could not fill. I was not performing shock for effect. I was simply unable to locate language in the moment because what she had just said did not compute in a way that my brain could process in real time. Meridian Creative, the company I had told her 8 months ago with 11 exclamation points, the company I had spent 3 weeks preparing an application for, the company I had wanted for 4 years. I said, "What role?" She said, "Senior art director." I sat with that for a moment that lasted more than a moment, and then I said, very carefully, "Becca, I applied for that role." There was a pause on her end, and then she said, "I know." Those 2 words, "I know." Not "I didn't realize," not "what a coincidence," not "I thought you'd withdrawn your application." I know. She had known. She had sat on the phone with me for an hour while I talked about this role, and she had known she was going to apply for it, or had already applied for it, or had applied for it after that conversation. I still don't know the exact sequence, and I have decided it doesn't entirely matter, because none of the possible sequences makes it better. I asked her when she had applied. She said about a week after we first talked about it, which meant she had applied before I had. She had submitted her application while I was still preparing mine. I asked her why she hadn't told me. She said she hadn't wanted to make things weird, which is a sentence that I have turned over in my mind many times since, and that I find more baffling each time I examine it. She had not wanted to make things weird, so she had applied in secret for the job her best friend had been building toward for 4 years, and she had told me only after she had gotten it, while calling to ask me to be happy for her. I asked her how she had framed her application, given that she had no formal design background and the role was specifically for an art director with significant creative leadership experience. There was a pause. She said she had presented herself as a creative director and strategist and had referenced my portfolio as an example of the creative vision she intended to bring to the role. My portfolio. She had used my portfolio. She had presented my work I had curated and built into a case study document during those 3 weeks of careful preparation as illustrative of her vision. I do not know exactly how she framed it. I do not know if she implied the work was hers or simply used it as a reference point in a way she told herself was innocent. I do not know because that question was where the conversation ended, because I told her I needed to get off the phone and I ended the call. And I sat on my couch in my apartment and did not move for a long time. My partner came home and found me sitting in the dark, which is not typical behavior for me, and I told him what had happened, and he sat next to me and was quiet for a while, and then he said, "What do you need right now?" And I said, I didn't know, which was accurate. What followed in the immediate days was a series of emotions that did not arrive in a clean sequence, but rather simultaneously, in a pile, demanding attention all at once. There was grief, the specific grief of a dream deferred again, this time not by an impersonal hiring decision, but by the deliberate action of someone I loved. There was fury, which is a cleaner emotion than grief and in some ways easier to inhabit. There was confusion that kept circling back to the same questions. How does a person do this? How does someone sit on the phone with her best friend and listen to her talk about what this job means and then apply for it? What is the internal architecture of that decision? Did she tell herself it was fine? Did she not think about it at all? Did she think about it and decide something that allowed her to proceed anyway? I did not contact Meridian. Some people in my life suggested that I should notify them that Becca had used my portfolio materials inappropriately, that the basis of her application was potentially fraudulent. I thought about this seriously and I decided against it. Not because what she had done wasn't wrong, but because I could not figure out how to make that call without it being at least partly about revenge rather than principle, and I did not want revenge to be the thing I was doing. I wanted to be clear with myself about my motivations, and revenge was not one I was willing to act from. I did not call Becca back. She texted twice in the first week, once to say she was sorry and wanted to talk, once to say she hoped I was okay. I did not respond to either message. I was not ready to talk, and I was also genuinely unsure what talking would accomplish. What she had done was done. The job was hers. The apology, however sincere, did not change the shape of what had happened, and I needed to figure out what I actually wanted from her before I engaged, because engaging from a place of rawness would only produce a conversation that satisfied the need to express pain without resolving anything. I took a month. During that month, I talked to my therapist at length, talked to my partner, talked to one other close friend who knew both Becca and me well enough to have useful perspective. The other friend was diplomatic. She said she thought Becca had made a terrible decision, probably from a combination of career desperation and a failure to fully think through what she was doing, rather than from a place of deliberate malice. I heard this. I did not find it as comforting as it was intended to be, because I'm not sure the distinction between malice and willful thoughtlessness matters as much as we'd like it to when the outcome is the same. At the end of the month, I wrote Becca a letter, not a text, not an email,
a letter, on paper, because I wanted to say what I needed to say in a form that I had controlled completely and that she could not immediately respond to in a way that derailed me. I told her what she had done. I told her what it meant, what it had cost, what it revealed about how she saw me and our friendship. I told her that using my portfolio, my work, the physical evidence of my creative thinking and years of effort to get a job she then called me to celebrate was a betrayal so specific and so precise that I was struggling to find a framework in which it made sense as the action of someone who loved me. I told her I didn't know yet what I wanted the future of our friendship to look like, but that I needed her to understand the full weight of what she had done before any conversation about that future could happen. She called after she received it. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that was 10 minutes long, which I listened to once and have not listened to again. She was crying. She said things that were probably true, that she hadn't been thinking clearly, that she had been in a desperate place professionally, that she had told herself my portfolio was just a reference point and minimized what it meant until it was too late to go back, that she had kept it from me because she knew on some level that she was doing something wrong, and knowing that didn't stop her. She said she was sorry in the way that people say sorry when they mean it, and it still isn't enough. I'm not sure sorry is the right currency for this particular debt. I'm not sure what the right currency is. My mother died 6 months after the Meridian call. She had been ill for some time, a long decline that we had been managing and anticipating and grieving in the way you grieve someone who is leaving slowly, with the paradox of having time to prepare and finding that preparation does nothing to diminish the impact of the actual loss. My mother was the kind of woman who held things together, who was the connective tissue of every room she was in, and losing her left an absence that was structural rather than just emotional. The world rearranged itself around the space she had occupied. Becca knew my mother. She had known her for 22 years. She had been to my parents' house hundreds of times. My mother had loved her with the particular warmth she extended to people she considered already family, which Becca had been for a long time. I did not invite Becca to the funeral. I was not in contact with her. The decision not to invite her was less a decision than an absence of action. I was in the full weight of grief, and I was not reaching out to someone I was not in contact with, and I did not think about it much beyond that. She came anyway.
I saw her when I was standing near the entrance of the funeral home before the service started, receiving people as they arrived. She came through the door in dark clothes, with her hair pulled back and red eyes that told me she had been crying before she arrived. And she crossed the room and put her arms around me before I had fully processed that she was there. I let her hug me. I don't know why exactly. Grief does things to your boundaries that ordinary life doesn't. Or maybe it was 22 years of muscle memory. Or maybe it was the specific vulnerability of standing in a funeral home having just lost my mother and being held by someone who had known her and loved her and was, whatever she had done, genuinely grieving too. I pulled back after a moment and looked at her and said, "You came." She said, "Of course I came. I'm so sorry about your mom." I said, "Okay." And then someone else arrived who needed my attention, and I turned away, and we did not speak again during the service. Afterward, outside, she found me again. She asked if we could talk. Not then, she was not asking for that, but at some point, when I was ready, whenever that was. She said she understood if I never was. She said she missed me, and she missed my mom, and she was sorry for everything, in a way that made the everything feel like it contained real specificity rather than vague apology. I told her I would think about it. I have been thinking about it. That is an accurate and honest statement about where I am. Here is what I know. 22 years is a significant wait. It is not light, and it does not become light simply because someone does something that breaks your trust. The version of Becca who sat with me through 2 Meridian rejections and talked me through them with honesty and care, that person was real. The person who then applied for the job in secret and used my portfolio and called me to celebrate, that was also real. Both are true simultaneously, and I have not yet found a way to resolve them into a verdict. I also know this. Meridian called me 2 months ago. Not to offer me a position, I want to be clear about that, this is not that kind of ending. They called because they had a contract project, a brand identity refresh for a mid-sized client that Astrid thought I would be well suited for. Someone in their network had recommended me. The project was substantial, the fee was good, and working on it would give me exactly the kind of project that belonged in a portfolio targeted at a company like Meridian. I said yes. I have been working with Meridian for 8 weeks. Becca and I are not on the same team, she is in a different department, and our paths have not crossed, though I am aware in the back of my mind that they exist in the same building. Astrid, in our first meeting, told me she had been aware of my previous applications and was glad to finally be working together. She said it with the particular ease of someone who doesn't know there is a weight attached to the statement, and I received it the same way. The work is good. It is genuinely good, the kind that makes you remember why you chose this. When I sit in their conference room or work through concepts at my desk at home, I feel something that I can only describe as rightness, the specific satisfaction of being in the correct place for your particular set of abilities. It is not the full-time role I wanted, but it is a beginning. And beginnings, I have learned at 37 after a year that cost me a friendship and a mother and a significant portion of my professional peace, are not things to be dismissed simply because they aren't yet everything. As for Becca, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. There are mornings when the thought of rebuilding that friendship feels like the most exhausting possible thing, when I think about the work of trusting someone again who has shown me the precise thing she was capable of when she was desperate and not thinking clearly. And there are other mornings, fewer, but they exist, when I think about 22 years and the person she has been for most of them, and I wonder if a single catastrophic failure, however precise and painful, is the whole of who she is. I haven't called her. She hasn't called me since the funeral, which I think she is doing deliberately, giving me the space she took away by showing up uninvited, trying to recalibrate. Whether I will call her eventually, I can't tell you. I can tell you that the question is no longer closed, which is different from how it felt 6 months ago, and different feels like something. What I can tell you with certainty is this. I am still here. I am still designing. I am still working toward the things I want, along routes that are less direct than I planned and more complicated than I would have chosen. I have a partner who stayed through the worst of the grief and the anger and the disorientation. I have a mother's memory that is sharp and present and that visits me in small daily moments, a particular quality of light, a specific smell, the way I catch myself arranging flowers the way she taught me, methodically, starting with the tallest stems. I have my portfolio. My actual portfolio, built from my actual work, belonging completely and only to me. Nobody can take that. Nobody can reference it into something that isn't mine. It is the record of how I think and what I make, and it is mine in a way that is not transferable, and I have added to it steadily since everything fell apart, because the answer to being undermined is not to stop building. You keep building. You keep building, and you see what it becomes. That's all I've got. That's the whole story.